God says, change your path. I'm going to make an example out of Pharaoh. He's going to chase after you thinking you're easy prey because you'll be stuck at the Red Sea on the Gulf of Aqaba. There's only one place where this could happen. You have a large beach. It's surrounded by mountains. Just like Josephus said, there are no mountains at the traditional Red Sea crossing site. But on the Gulf of Aqaba, you have one beach at Nuweiba, and it's surrounded by mountains. And there's only one way onto that beach, and that's through the wadi, or this valley system. And it comes off this ancient trade route. So they basically made a right turn off the trade route, went down through this wadi with Tyre to the beach. And now they're stuck there. Like, now what? Pharaoh's army's coming in behind. And so that's exactly how they got to the beach. Coming off the trade route. And it all makes sense. Like, when you're there, you realize, wow, like, there's no way off this beach. You have to go like into the water, or, obviously God opened the way for them and split the Red Sea there.
Well, hello and welcome to the Tinfoil Hat Club. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Ben.
And thank you for joining us yet again. So we have a special guest today. Very excited for this conversation. And this gentleman has a fascinating story that actually ties into another fascinating thing that we've already covered on the show, which is Ron Wyatt. And he has a tie there that we're going to get to. But we have a gentleman joining us that you may have actually seen if you are into History Channel, Discovery Channel, Science Channel, any of the archaeological site, digging it all, and some of these things that you might be finding if you're out there searching around. But it's actually Andrew Jones. So he is a biblical researcher. He's currently living in Turkey, but he has done a ton of different research at different sites. He's been to these different sites and leading a lot of tours at different sites. And he's up there in Turkey right now doing that right this second. But yeah, fascinating. Thanks for coming on the show, brother. We really appreciate you doing it.
Thank you guys for having me. This is exciting to share, and hopefully people can learn more about these sites. And yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So, the thing that we're going to really cover today, and here's your hang in there moment because we're going to get there, is we're going to dive into the actual site of the Red Sea crossing today. And if you're familiar with Ron Wyatt at all, it's going to very much follow that trail. But if you are not, and even if you are, this is going to be a really good dive today because it is so very different in reality of where this is all at, and it gets into where Mount Sinai is and several different things, where these are physically located in reality versus a lot of times where we're taught they are even in church. So that's going to kind of be what we're going to really dive into today. But I think for starters, one of the coolest parts of Andrew's story is really how you got started on this trek as far as the biblical research and the archaeological aspect, because again, it ties back into Ron. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that story of how you kind of got going there and how he was the influence for you to do this.
Yeah. So growing up, I was interested in archaeology and history as a kid, but it was in 1990 or 91 that Ron Wyatt came out to California where I lived, and it was a school night. I remember it was a Thursday night. And I saw this advertisement for this man claiming to have found Mount Sinai, the Exodus route, Noah's Ark, and other things. And so I was a geek back then. Maybe I'm still am, but I had homework because I didn't want to get a bad grade, so I was studying or whatever for the next day's test. So I asked my father, "Can you go to this one night at a local church and just hear what this man had to say and come back and tell me?" And so he agreed to. So he went to the meeting, and then he came back and he said, "Well, this guy says he found everything."
Yeah.
And so I was interested, I was like, well, I didn't discount it all. I was like, I'm just a kid. So I'm like, okay, I want to go find out more about this. And I saw that he had a book out, Discovered Noah's Ark, and it was in a local bookstore. So I bought it. It was a very small paperback, and it kind of went over briefly all his different claimed discoveries, but it just made me want to talk to him because I had so many questions. So this is pre-internet. So I called 411, got the operator on the phone.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Hey, can you find a Ronald Wyatt in Madison, Tennessee?" And so they did. They dialed through and they said, "Well, we have his number. Do you want us to connect you to him?" I said, "Yeah." So they called the number and he actually picked up. And so I was stunned. But he said he had just walked in the door. It was like perfect timing. but he had just walked in the door and he wanted me to call him back the next day because he just came back from the Middle East. And so I did. Obviously, I called him back the next day, and we spoke for about 2 hours. And then I called him the next day after that, and we spoke another 2 hours. And then from that time until he passed away, I would talk to him on the phone a lot. I mean, I just had a lot of questions. But it wasn't just him. Once I found out who he was involved with or who had worked with him or even his critics, I would try to reach out to them too. So this was all through high school, from middle school to high school and then into my college years, just trying to research this all out. And we finally had him out to California in 1995 and 96, 2 different meetings. And that's my first time I met him. And so I got to meet him and see how he acted and how, what he had to say about these topics. And then 1997, I was able to finally go to see the Noah's Ark site here in Turkey when a friend of mine asked me to be his travel companion. And so I was out here for about 5 days, I think, in June of 97. Now, sadly, Ron passed away in 1999, but the next year, the summer of 2000, we had a group that went over here and we went to all the sites we could. So, Turkey, Israel, and Egypt. And we were, then that group was really interested in trying to find the gold chariot wheel that Ron had documented. And so we spent 3 or 4 days out there. I'm not a scuba diver, but I was doing video work. So I stayed on the boat while my friends were under the water for 3 or 4 days, doing these dives, trying to find this chariot wheel. So it was very fascinating. But, at that time, Saudi Arabia was not open. So you could look across and see the land of Midian. And, it's just like calling you, like so close, 8 miles across that gulf, 8 to 9 miles. And yet you couldn't enter the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. But so that was a really great year. I went twice to the Noah's Ark site where I actually lived 30 minutes from in eastern Turkey. And then after that, I got involved with, from 2003 to 6, I was the head of the, documentation team. We had a bunch of photographers, and we were documenting the Wyatt archaeological research dig that Richard Reeves was leading. He took over the ministry after Ron passed away, and he got a permit from the Israeli Antiquities Authority to excavate in Jerusalem to look for the Ark of the Covenant. And so I was in charge of the film crew for that and the photographers. And so every summer I would spend a month in Jerusalem on that project. And so that was really fun. I got to see the Holy Land and the sites around Jerusalem a lot. But now I live here in eastern Turkey. And I love the country of Turkey. So much history here, prehistory, biblical history, and the culture. The people are just awesome and friendly, and and it's close to where all these sites are. It's a quick flight to Saudi Arabia or Egypt. So I love it.
Yeah, so cool.
I'll ask this.
No, go away.
Getting to know Ron Wyatt, what was he like? I mean, I there's critics on saying he was whatever, but what was your take?
Yeah, so I was never, you can call it like a fanboy. Like there are those today who are like everything Ron said is like from the mouth of God or something. I believe that God led him, obviously, in these sites, and that he researched, and a lot of them he found, other people had found, but he promoted. Like Noah's Ark was discovered in 1959, like Captain Drupanar. But Ron was one who picked up the ball and ran with it and did the research and the promotion, like the hard work, starting in the 1970s. So when I first met him, I was a kid. I was just doing this research, but the one thing I noticed about him is that he was just focused on the Bible. He didn't talk about himself. He didn't talk about politics or sports or current events unless it related to like biblical prophecy or history. I remember we had him at my house the very first time he came to Sacramento, and we had a potluck, a lunch before the meeting. And so we had, I think, 20 or 25 people in my house and my parents' house. And then he, during this conversation, during the meal, every topic comes up, and he didn't participate when someone would talk about like Sacramento Kings or the basketballs, this or that, or I remember politics came up, and but as soon as you mentioned the Bible or archaeology, he would join right in, and you could tell it was his passion, and so it was really interesting. I really admired his that was his life work, even though he was a nurse anesthetist. That was just to make the money so he could go pursue the archaeology. And then it wasn't just to find something. Like, he was using it to win souls. He believed that we were living in the end times, and that God had preserved archaeological sites that would help people come to the kingdom, come to Christ. And so this was something that he was using as a tool to witness to people, was biblical archaeology.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems like that's very much the same thing for you. That's exactly where you've wound up, and almost the same pathway.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to be like, it wasn't like a planned course. To be, okay, I'm going to live in Turkey. I'm going to do
Right.
tours or archaeology.
Right.
I did not think that I'd be doing this.
Yeah, how awesome though, man. And it's kind of one of those fun things where you wind up kind of doing where your heart's led by the Lord, and it's such a joyous work too, man. For us, this is kind of where we felt like God has led us, and like I said before we hit record, He's the master of the ship. We just get to be the two lucky schlubs that be like, okay, God, where are we going with the boat? Which is awesome.
Yeah, I think even Ron said that, where he was talking about how he was like God's digger. He was, like, he was in the trenches for God.
Yeah.
But just do whatever he can for the kingdom.
Yeah, man. So you've obviously gotten in here. You've looked at a lot of these sites that Ron had been to ahead of time. And is there anything in there that has basically have you confirmed the same exact things that, this man claimed?
Yeah, it's been amazing being out here. Like, for the major sites out here, definitely, I believe these are the correct sites. Like the Ruppinor boat formation, I believe it's Noah's Ark. Mount Sinai has to be in Arabia. It mentions, in the biblical account, how Moses went with Jethro's sheep to the mountain. And Jethro was the high priest of Midian. And Midian, the archaeological evidence, has that land in Northwest Arabia. It's not in the Sinai Peninsula at all. There's no archaeology for that. And so Mount Sinai has to be in or near this land of Midian in Northwest Arabia. And this is where you find this one mountain that has a big plain in front of it, that has local tradition from the Bedouin that this is the mountain of Moses, that has archaeological evidence around it that you can associate with the biblical account, like the cow petroglyphs, this stone structure that looks like an altar site with animal corrals for the animal sacrifices. And this mountain has one cave on it at the top, and it has a blackened peak. Even though it's basalt rock, you don't know what God did, he could have done, might have done to change, the rock up there. And just being able to climb that mountain many times, just thank God for this opportunity to be able to go up there. But, even Ron never climbed it. He was there twice in 84 and 85 to Mount Sinai. In that brief time, he's able to discover all these major things. You can see how God was leading him.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like, how can one person go out there for a couple of days and go to the right valley, the right wadi, and the right base, mountain base to see this, unless you're led by God? So I really believe that that's Sinai. And then just backtracking from Sinai to the land of Goshen, you have to figure out the Exodus route. And what's interesting is, like, here's a good example. When Ron, it's on the end of a little short video, when Ron first met Jim and Penny Caldwell. Now, they're the American couple. Jim was working in the oil industry in Saudi Arabia for 10 years, I believe, from 1990 to 2000. And they got interested in Mount Sinai and that whole topic. But and it was like their whole story is online, but it's a miracle how they were able to connect with Ron and go out to Mount Sinai and document for free, all these places that Ron, he had his film confiscated and all his photographs were taken away by the Saudis in 84 and 85. So I think he met them in 91 or 92, and he was able to get this footage from them and share it with the world. But when his first trip, he met with them, I think it was in Dubai, and they gave him the footage for that very first trip of theirs to the base of the mountain. And they asked Ron, well, what do you think Rephidim is? Now, if you're really into the Exodus, you'll know where that site is. But Rephidim is the last camping site before the Israelites get to Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
And at Rephidim, you have a number of important events happen on the Exodus. Number one, there's no water there, so the Israelites are complaining, and that's where God tells Moses to strike the rock of Horeb. But this is not at Kadesh Barnea. There's a second rock where God says to Moses to speak to it, and when Moses gets angry and strikes it, and then he's banned from the Promised Land. But this is Rephidim. And the rock is called the rock of Horeb. But then in the Bible, you see Mount Sinai is also called Horeb, especially in the book of Deuteronomy, and it says Elijah fled to Horeb in 1 Kings 19. So you have all these, then you had the Battle of the Amalekites. And then you had Jethro, the high priest of Midian, bringing Moses and his two sons, bringing Moses, his wife, and his two sons
Yeah.
to the encampment of the Israelites at Rephidim. So you have these three big things. You have the rock being split and water coming out. You have the Battle of the Amalekites, the Jethro showing up. And this has all happened at Rephidim. And so the Caldwells in this video, they asked Ron, well, what do you think, the Rephidim is? And Ron just briefly says, well, it has to be on the western side of the mountain range. Because on the eastern side of this like long chain that follows kind of the coast, it's inland, but it follows like the Gulf of Aqaba coast. This mountain range has the eastern and western side. On the east side, it's higher elevation. So it's lower temperature. It's like a high desert. And so it's not as hot in the summer up there. So you can see how the Israelites lived up there for 11 months at the base of Sinai. But from that side, you go to the west side, and it's lower elevation, super hot and dry. And and Ron never been to that side. He's only on his 2 short trips, he's only been to the base on the east side. So when the Caldwells asked him about where Rephidim was, he said, check out the west side. It has to be over there. Now, on one of the trips to the Caldwells early on, they're on the west side, and they're actually not looking for Rephidim. They're trying to find a way over the mountain range because the base of the mountain is shut down, and there's a fence around it. The Saudis are watching. The local Bedouins are making sure people don't go there. So they're trying to sneak into that site by going over the mountaintop from the west side to the east side. And they get over to the west side, and this whole video is on their YouTube channel, and they're recording it, and they come across this giant split rock that's on a hill. It's a 70-foot high rock on it, like same height hill.
Yeah.
So it's really tall, and it has a big split down the middle. And at the base, you see this erosion. And so Jim and Penny, at first they'll call it the monument in their video, like, oh, look at this, it looks like a monument. And then they get closer, and they're climbing up on the base of this rock, and they see the erosion marks around it. And then they realize, wow, we're on the west side. This could have been the stop where the Israelites went through when they went around the mountain range to get to the east side from the Red Sea crossing. And then this has to be Rephidim, the split rock. And, here Ron had mentioned this without even being there, but just reading the Bible carefully and, using,
Logic.
Logical.
Yeah.
Logic. Just be able to just say, well, if the Bible says this, then it has to be over on this side over here somewhere. And sure enough, there's a big split rock there. So
Yeah.
it's just very fascinating how, obviously God was guiding him, but at the same time, Ron had this knack for figuring things out too. God gave him the wisdom for that.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's so fascinating because, we are pretty much taught in the church growing up that Mount Sinai is in the Sinai Peninsula. And that is not geographically correct. And it's funny because we can find all kinds of things. You've mentioned several of them in the Bible, but one of the most obvious in the Bible is actually in the New Testament, not even the Old Testament. And it's in Galatians. It's Galatians 4:25, where it clearly says Sinai in Arabia.
That's why I gave you that look.
I thought maybe that's where you were going.
Yeah.
So it clearly says that. And the cool thing too with the technology is first of all, go on Google and you can go and zoom into these sites and you can see this for yourself. And it's so awesome because even with like where the Rock of Horeb is, you can go down to ground level and you can pan the camera around and see this stuff. And the funny thing about the Rock of Horeb is there is nothing even like that around the area. It's, to me, when I looked at it, it's like this gigantic rock that's, as tall as you mentioned, and there's really nothing like it around there. And you can see all the erosion marks and everything. Even from a distance, you can still see a lot of these things. So it's kind of incredible.
Maybe God.
There's another guy I know out there who does tours. He's from Europe, and I ran into him. It's funny because we run into these people. I've at the Golden Calf Alder site. We'll just have like a meetup. Just by accident, we're like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" "Well, I'm a tour. How are you?" In the past, you had to sneak around, and now it's just like, "Hey, you just show up in your Jeep and you're at Mount Sinai." And it's still hard to believe that we were able to do this.
I know, right?
But he was telling me he was on a tour, and they ran into a Bedouin at the Split Rock, and this guy was saying, "Oh, we have a tradition that like this is the Rock of Moses," but he was saying that here's an example. They have a friend of theirs who was born at the base of the Split Rock. A Bedouin, they're I guess at that time they were camping at the base, and his mom gave birth, and he was there, born right there at the Split Rock. But his name Like you'd call me Andrew from Sacramento, or like if there's a bunch of Andrews. Okay, you're Andrew from New York, whatever. Well, this guy's name was, and I don't remember his first name, but let's assume it's Muhammad. And everyone there's named Muhammad. Muhammad of the Split Rock, or not of the Split Rock, Muhammad of the Rock.
Oh,
And
wow.
so when locals would hear that, they're not thinking, in the Bible account it said God told Moses, strike the rock of Horeb.
Yeah.
And when you're there on the ground, there's tons of rocks everywhere. I mean, the whole place is rocks.
Yeah,
So
right.
when God tells Moses that, you're always thinking, well, how does he know which rock? Well, this was a big special rock that was obviously standing out.
Yeah.
And so here's a guy who was born there, and people nicknamed him Muhammad of the Rock. And when you tell people that, that means this guy because he was born at the base of this famous big rock.
Yeah. How crazy
And
is
so
that?
that just confirmation, just from that little story, you can see how it just stands out that this rock, and then it just fills in like, okay, when the Israelites were in this area, Moses would have noticed that big rock,
Yeah.
and it was something that people talked about, the Midianites, or people just knew about.
Yeah. And for everybody listening, then you may not be watching. This is another show where you might want to go watch this one, because I'm going to throw some visual aids up, because geography is going to be extremely important to our discussion today, as it already is showing to be. And you really need to understand the geography of the area to have a much better understanding visually of what we're going to talk about today with the Exodus path and where all these things are. And again, you can go right on Google, you can follow along if you're listening, and you can literally pull this up on a map, and you can get a good understanding and idea of where we are and the path that was actually taken. And I kind of want to back up to the Exodus here in a second, but I want to explain something that I think a lot of people will probably relate to this, because if they're familiar with the story at all. And we kind of talked about this before we hit record. When you're talking about the Red Sea, I think we have this impression that we have this gigantic, huge body of water. And they cross this gigantic, monstrous, huge body of water, which the Red Sea itself has to be, I don't even know, 40, 50 miles across. Like the large portion of the sea could be even larger than that.
Yeah, the main Red Sea. Yes.
Yeah. But when you get to the top of the Red Sea, I want everybody to think of like a butterfly, and how it has the antennas that come off the top. It has like this kind of long, elongated kind of cylindrical structure, but then at the top you have the two antennae that come off. And that's very much how the Red Sea is actually constructed as well, or built, or geographically how it looks. The left, when you're looking down on a map, the left, when it breaks off into the two at the top, there are two gulfs that are actually formed. The left gulf is actually the Gulf of Suez, which we now know to be the Suez Canal, which was cut through to be able to give you access from the Red Sea all the way into the Mediterranean. And then on the right is actually the Gulf of Aqaba, which we don't really ever hear much about. And it's at the Gulf of Aqaba where the Red Sea crossing actually took place, that we can geographically compare to the Bible and see. And when you zoom out on this, there is a tremendous distance, that we don't think about. We kind of talked about this before we hit record too, between where these folks are actually fleeing from in Egypt to this location where they would have crossed. So just kind of if we can go back a little bit, walk us through their flight path, if you will, away, and how they kind of went and wound up at this wadi, this little beach that kind of sticks out on the western portion of the Gulf of Aqaba, where the Red Sea parting took place and crossing.
Yeah. So when you first think of Mount Sinai, the very first mention of it is God telling Moses to go back to Egypt at the burning bush. So if you backtrack a little bit, Moses has killed an Egyptian who was beating some Hebrew slaves. And so then Moses has to flee because he finds out that Pharaoh wants to kill him. And so Moses leaves Egypt, and it says he fled to the land of Midian, and he lived in the house of Jethro, who was the high priest of Midian. So over the years, people have suggested, because Saudi was a closed country, some have said, well, so Midian, because again, they're focused on this, Mount Sinai has to be where the traditional Sinai is. This is accepted as fact. There's no archaeology for that. And so then if Moses is at the burning bush where he talks to God about this mission to go to Mount Sinai and go back to Egypt and bring the people of Israel to Mount Sinai, then Midian has to be close by. And so you'll have some maps that'll have Midian on the west side of this Gulf of Aqaba, that right finger of the Red Sea. But in reality, well, again, most maps though show Midian to be in northwest Saudi Arabia. And so if you look at Midian, if you look at this region of Saudi, Saudi is not just a big desert with sand dunes. There's mountains, there are oases, there are flat areas. And what we're finding out is that this northwest area was inhabited by a lot of people. There were people living there around the oases, and they built cities and towns. And there was, civilization there. There wasn't just a big empty desert.
Yeah.
And so it's in this area that now that you have archaeologists digging. You have the French, the German, the Austrians that are digging in these different oasis cities or town sites. And then you start having the traditions. It's just let's go up to the Muslim time period when Islam takes over that area. You have the Islamic geographers who are connecting in biblical sites, biblical events with local sites, and they're putting a lot of the Exodus sites, the same from their tradition and from what they see on the ground, they're putting it in Northwest Arabia for the Exodus. In fact, one geographer who is out there from, I forget his name, he's a famous one from the time of the Ottoman Empire, but he was out there, I believe, in the early 1700s, and he's in Northwest Arabia, and he's going through Magna, which is a Saudi town on the coast with the Gulf of Aqaba, just south of the Red Sea crossing. And if you look on Google, if you look up Magna, Magna, on your Google Maps, you'll find that even people have, put their own pin, but it does say the Springs of Moses, or Ayud Musa in Arabic. And so these springs are bubbling out of the ground, and there's a local tradition that says has Moses and the Israelites there. Now, some people could say, well, this is because of Ron Wyatt or the Caldwells that people are putting like the names. Yeah. But actually, you have this guy 300 years ago, 1700s, who is there, and they're telling him Moses was here, and they even show him a rock they believe that Moses struck that the water came out nearby. Now, this is not the split rock that the Caldwells found in the 90s, but we're very close to that site. But again, what I'm trying to show is that you have this local tradition that you could call it pre-Ron Wyatt, before the 1980s,
right?
That have these events of the Exodus. The split rock was the last place, where Moses struck that rock. That's the last camping site before they get to Mount Sinai. And here that is in Northwest Arabia, according to the locals. And this was 300 years ago, they're saying that.
Yeah.
And most people didn't realize that. And you have other sites too. When we were there in Al-Bada, which you can call it the home of Jethro, it has these Nabatean tombs that, again, the Muslims had associated with the tombs of Jethro. Of course, and in the Quran, they call him Shuaib, this prophet from this area. And they have these tombs that they had renamed and said the Midianites lived in them, these caves. But when we were there in 2018, one of the locals came to us at that archaeological site. It's a public archaeological site. And then the Saudi came up and said, how have you seen Wadi Tayyibism? And this is known if you look at the Caldwell's videos and Ron Wyatt's videos, they believe that this is Elam because it has 12 modern wells still there.
Yeah,
It is a canyon oasis. Very beautiful site, red rocks. You have these 3 or 4 large oases with more than 70 palm trees now, but there's still 12 wells, interesting enough. And here's a local Saudi telling us, go check that out, because he was saying that that canyon this is their story, the canyon had opened up and God opened the way for the Israelites to travel through there. And they said, yeah, Musa and the Yehudites, Moses and the Israelites went through that canyon. And here's a local Saudi telling us to go check it out. So these are just examples. I think the best example is Ron, when he's here with David Fazel, 1985, his second trip in, and he's at the base of Mount Sinai. And when they meet the one Bedouin living there, Ibrahim, and now there's a little village there with a gas station, but before there's no one but Ibrahim's tent. But Ibrahim came up to them and he said, "Hena Jabal Musa," to Ron and Fazel, which means in Arabic, and that's Arabic, but in English that means, "Here is the mountain of Moses." Now, we're finding from other Bedouins who've lived there that they say, "Oh, my father knew about this. He would travel up here, and we believe this is the mountain of Moses." In fact, I was there last year. Some 20 or 30-year-olds, they were just kind of hanging out at the altar of Moses. And I asked, well, how far back does this tradition go? And he said, oh, it's not a written tradition. It's an oral tradition passed down, but it's not recent. He said, "Oh yeah, my grandfather said this was the mountain of Moses." Of all the mountains in the Middle East, why would they choose this? I mean, this is before Ron Wyatt too. Like, why would they say this is the mountain of Moses? So you have this strong local tradition that this one mountain is it. And so if you backtrack with Moses seeing the burning bush in Midian, and God telling Moses, "Bring the Israelites here," now you got to find the route. How did the Israelites get there? And so if you're looking at a map, you have to go to where the Israelites were living at the time in Egypt, or to the land of Goshen. And that was the northeast corner of the Nile Delta. This was the best land of Egypt. Remember Joseph, when Jacob and his brothers came down there during the famine, Pharaoh gave them the best land of Egypt.
Yeah.
And they said, because you were shepherds, you guys can stay there and live in this area. Obviously, food for the sheep and all that. And so this is the Nile Delta. But there was also the entry point into Egypt from Canaan. People had to pass through that area, and that's where the Israelites settled. Later when they became enslaved, that still was their homeland. That's still where they were living. And then you read in the Exodus account, chapter 13 and 14 and 15, where they're leaving Egypt during right after Passover. That next morning they leave, and it says they were in their homes on Passover. The next day they leave and they journey to Sukkoth, and they built temporary shelters out of palm tree branches and such. And so that was their first camping site, was at Sukkoth. And that had to have been a border area, because you got to have an area that's large enough for the Israelites to gather together from all their different homes. And then you have to have an oasis with all the palm trees where they built the little shelters. And then it says from there, they journeyed through, it says, the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea.
Yeah.
Now, here is where most people have Sukkoth, where Ron even shows it, that it's near Lake Ismaiah, Lake Timzah, or the town of Ismaiah. And so this area there, even traditional Red Sea crossing people have Sukkoth right there. But where everything splits off, most Bible maps has the Red Sea crossing just right near that lake. You're going either north up to near the Mediterranean Sea, or south to the tip of the Gulf of Suez, or one of the bitter lakes, or even Lake Timzah itself. These are all these eastern border lakes. And so everyone if you look at biblical maps, most of them would say, the Red Sea crossing happened just right by the land of Goshen. And then, according to Ron, though, he read it as, well, if Sinai is further away, and if you have 1 or 2 million people, if you take the biblical account with those numbers, then they could not have been so close to the land of Goshen. So then from there, they journeyed. The next stop is Etham, according to the book of Exodus. And it was at Etham that's where God reveals the plan of the Red Sea crossing. And so you're going across that Sinai Peninsula. And if you look at it, you realize, this is the route that Moses fled on 40 years before. When he fled Pharaoh, because he killed that Egyptian, said he fled to the land of Midian. There's an ancient trade route that people know about that went from Egypt to the Arabian Peninsula. And so people on their camels or donkeys, they would walk it. This is the trade route that people would go along, and like an ancient highway, this desert path. And this is what Moses was going on his own 40 years before. And now he's taking the Israelites, because God told him, when he was at Sinai, God didn't say, "Okay, I'm going to have you go to the Red Sea crossing. I'm going to split it. You go through there, and you go to Rephidim." No, he just said, "Bring the Israelites to Mount Sinai." So Moses, they followed the cloud, but they're going along the route you logically think they would go on, which is the ancient trade route. And there's at Etham, though, that God says, "No, change your directions, change your path. I'm going to make an example out of Pharaoh. He's going to chase after you, thinking you're easy prey, because you'll be stuck at the Red Sea."
Mm-hmm.
And there's only one spot on the Gulf of Aqaba, on that western side. There's only one place where this could happen. You have a large beach. It's surrounded by mountains, just like Josephus said. There are no mountains at the traditional, those lakes. And it's all flat area over there with the traditional Red Sea crossing site. But on the Gulf of Aqaba, you have one beach at Nuweiba. It's a modern town of Nuweiba.
Yep.
And it's surrounded by mountains. And there's only one way onto that beach, and that's through the Wadi, or this valley system, Wadi Watir. And it comes off this ancient trade route. So they basically made a right turn off the trade route, a U-turn, went down through this Wadi Watir valley to the beach. And now they're stuck there. Like, now what? And Pharaoh's army's coming in behind. And so that's exactly how they got to the beach, by coming off the trade route. And it all makes sense. Like when you're there, you realize, wow, like there's no way off this beach. You have to go like into the water, or obviously God opened the way for them and split the Red Sea there.
Yeah, this is crazy. So if anybody wants to kind of know like where in the Bible to pick up the story, kind of what we just talked about with the beginning stages of this Exodus and how we get to this point, best place, and I was pulling it up while you were talking on my phone. So it's actually Exodus 12, right around verse 37, which is talking about how the Israelites traveled from Ramses to Sukkot. And it says in here some 600,000 men on foot, not counting children. The other thing that it would not count either would also be the women. So the women and the children, right? So that's how you wind up at that number that we're talking about, where it had to be 1 million people. And for those of you that are watching or listening, I will warn you now ahead of time that these two poor guys that I'm sitting with and talking to on the other end are not having good allergy days. Poor Ben, man, his eye is just killing him over here.
I'm so sorry.
I feel bad for him, but little fun detour on that front. But this is a good place to pick up the story, and you kind of get this whole thing. But the other thing too is that you see when you look on a map and you can see it's like, and you touched upon it, of like the promised land is literally like right there, right? Canaan is right there. I mean, in geographical terms, for the amount of travel we're talking, it's not far off. But one of the things that happens when you read this story is God is afraid to take the people that direction because of the Philistines. He has them kind of divert away. One, because he wants to kind of teach Pharaoh a lesson, but two, it says in Exodus that God was afraid that their spirits would be broken, having to come out of this and then turn around and have a fight with the Philistines, because that would effectively be what we would know today as all modern day Gaza, right? So we're all familiar pretty much with modern day Gaza now on the southwestern portion of Israel. And obviously when the Gazans had everything go down with what they have now, they fled to southern Gaza, and they were also trying to flee into Egypt. So you can kind of take a modern telling and put the biblical story over it now, and it makes more sense geographically.
If you look how close they were, I believe it's written or in the Egyptian history where I believe it's Thutmose III, he takes his armies. That's the way of in the Bible, it's called the way of the Philistines. In Greek, it's called way of the sea, Maris of Greece,
Yeah.
Greek. And so this is this trade route that, and then the ancient Egyptian called the way of Horus. And so this trade route is this coastal road that go from ancient Egypt, the land of Goshen, all the way along the coast, the way of Horus, all the way into Canaan. And that's the closest way to get to the promised land. And it took Thutmose III, I believe, 10 or 11 days, it says, in the ancient Egyptian history, for his armies to go that route. So the Israelites could have done the same thing. But according to Exodus, God tells Moses, I'm not going to lead you on that route, because they could encounter war. Obviously they're escaping slaves. The Philistines were, the Israelites were very weak in their faith. They're just, escaping slaves from Egypt, and they had not yet understood God and believed in him fully. So they had a lot of doubts. You saw through the 40 years of wandering, they're always complaining. But God didn't want to lead them that way because how close they were to the Philistines.
Yeah.
He took them the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, it says. So that's a second way out of Egypt. But that one goes through this wilderness territory. Now, what's really crazy, yet the people who say that the Red Sea crossing is very close to the land of Egypt, like right there, basically. Like if you're in Goshen, you can just walk out maybe 1 or 2 days and you're at the Red Sea crossing, they'll have you. They want you to believe this. But the locations where they choose it, it's along this way of Horus, or the way of the Philistines, the exact place where God said he didn't want to lead them. And so it doesn't make any sense for me for people to put the Red Sea crossing up there along that coastal highway, like a lot of scholars do, because that's exactly where God said, don't go that way. I'll lead you another way out. And so when they're going another way out, the only place where they can come across the sea is the Gulf of Aqaba. Because now you're away from Egypt. And in fact, when they're at the Red Sea crossing, the Israelites complained. They said, why did you lead us out of Egypt? And so here you are at the crossing site, and the Israelites know that they're out of Egypt already. You're not in the eastern side of these lakes that all your Bible maps have.
Yeah.
They're way outside of the land of Egypt, and they went day and night, according to the book of Nehemiah. The pillar of fire led them day and night, not just, daytime. So they're running. And it says they had 7 days of unleavened bread, the bread of haste. So they've been kicked out of their homes. They're fleeing fast day and night, and then they come to the Red Sea crossing. So that gives you a time frame of more than 1 or 2 days. Now there are 3 camping sites. You have Sukkoth, Etham, and the Red Sea crossing. Those 3 camping sites do not represent 3 days. Like there wasn't just one day to camp, one day. So obviously, just like if you look at all the camping sites between Goshen and Mount Sinai, I think there are 10 of them. Sinai is not a 10 days journey from Mount Sinai. Even the traditional Mount Sinai is more than 10 days.
Yeah, not with a million people.
Yeah, exactly. And these camping sites don't represent a day's journey, like 20 miles or whatever. So because of that, you're looking at, okay, the Red Sea is 3 camping sites away from Goshen, but maybe it took them a week. Maybe it took them 2 weeks. Maybe the feast of unleavened bread represents the time frame. That's a traditional Jewish thinking that feast of unleavened bread is the time frame to the Red Sea crossing. Other people think it took 2 days, 2 weeks or 10 days. But at any rate, it's longer, and it shows that the Israelites went further out. No, I had a debate with somebody online, and they were saying, Moses told Pharaoh, like, let us take the Israelites 3 days out to the wilderness to worship God. And so Mount Sinai has to be 3 days away from Goshen. And if you look at that, so there's different views of why Moses said that, whether that was a negotiating tactic to see if Pharaoh believed and would let them go, or something else. Or at any rate, if you look at even the traditional Mount Sinai, it's not 3 days out. And even a couple of people have tried to place the Sinai site, and it would be like a low hill, 3 days from the land of Goshen. But then if you look at the actual record of the journey, it says in Exodus chapter 19, verse 1 and 2, that is on the first of the month, of the third month, the self-same day. So some people interpret that to be the first day of the third month, they arrived at Mount Sinai. Now, remember, they left the 15th day of the first month, the day after Passover. Mm-hmm. So if you do the math, that's minimum 45 days. So why would the Israelites go 45 days for a 3-day journey?
Right.
Like that would be like walking an inch or 2 a day.
Right.
And then you have 1 or 2 million people, you just backing up on each other. Yeah, so this 3 days thing from Moses talked to Pharaoh, you can't use that to try to find Mount Sinai.
No.
That's one thing people try to use, and it doesn't work. It was something else that he was dealing with there, negotiating with Pharaoh and testing him.
The other thing that doesn't make any sense just from a logical perspective is we know that Pharaoh and the army are chasing him with horses and chariots, right? You're going to mow down 1,000, 1 million, how slow 1 million people are going to move on foot. Not everybody has, horses and cattle and stuff. They're moving all of this, right? Plus, it says right before they left, they plundered the Egyptians. They plundered them with all this gold and back pay for, 400 years of services rendered.
Carts.
Yeah, exactly. Right. They've got all this stuff they got to haul, and Pharaoh decides that he's going to run them down with horses and chariots, which we know is part of the story. It just doesn't make any sense. You can't apply logic to that, right? He's going to mow these people down in like half of a day.
Well, I hadn't really thought about it, like the time frame, until now, and I'm like, well, if everybody's firstborn died in Egypt, they're going to be mourning.
Yeah, they're like, let's load up.
And everything firstborn died, so you have animals.
Yeah. Horses.
So you're going to have to wait a while before you can do anything. And if they've left in the middle of the night, running.
That's actually valid too, like with the horses, they're going to have to one of the horses that's hooked to the chariot or that would normally drive the chariot's going to be dead. Yeah. They're going to have to rearrange all this military hardware. Yeah. That's a rather large inconvenience.
Yeah. So mourning plus, we've got a couple smaller horses that we can break or maybe,
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's a major disaster.
Right.
You think about a whole nation, the firstborn being killed, and of course your economy is collapsed and all your gods.
Yeah.
People are like, God has destroyed their belief in these different Egyptian gods.
Yeah, exactly.
All the plagues.
Yeah, I'm gonna read this in Exodus 13 because it talks about what we were talking about a second ago with the exit path out and kind of the combo pack of the highway, the normal path, and the deal with the Philistines. And it's actually Exodus 13:17. And we're reading from the CJB, which is Complete Jewish Bible. We like that a lot. After Pharaoh had let the people go, God did not guide them to the highway that goes through the land of the Philistine, because it was close by. God thought that the people, upon seeing war, might change their minds and return to Egypt. Rather, God led the people by a roundabout route through the desert by the Sea of Suf, S-U-F. The people of Israel went up from the land of Egypt fully armed, which we know because then obviously we get into the war with the, I believe in the Amalekites is what we talked about earlier. So that's just kind of an interesting where you can see what we're talking about in the Bible. If you want to go read along, you can. And that's again, Exodus 13:17. The interesting point here is we have another geographical location that I want to ask you about, the Sea of Suf, S-U-F. Are we familiar with maybe where that is?
Yeah, well, that's where like the Septuagint and now modern Bibles call the Red Sea.
Okay.
So that's so that would be the body of water. Some of it associated with the whole Red Sea, the Gulf of Suez, and the Gulf of Aqaba. Others have said it's just the Gulf of Aqaba. Of course, the traditionalists will say it's the lakes for the traditional Red Sea crossing, or the Gulf of Suez itself. What's interesting, though, when you talk about the Red Sea or the Sea of the Yam Suf, the Sea of Suf, is that First Kings. I don't know the exact chapter, but it's where it talks about Solomon's ships that would go out, and every 2 years would come back with all this trade goods and gold and ivory from Africa.
Yeah.
That the port for Solomon was on the Yam Suf. It says in First Kings. Again, I don't know the chapter offhand, and so there's only we know where that is. That's at the tip of the Gulf of Aqaba.
Okay.
And that was Solomon's port for the ships, and go down the Gulf, come all the way around to the main Gulf of the main Red Sea, and go all the way out towards Africa there. And so here's the biblical writer is using the same term used for the Red Sea crossing for this body of water where Solomon had his ships. And you also have that term being used during the Exodus, where it talks about some of the roads that the Israelites took after they left Mount Sinai. The road toward the way of the Red Sea, I would say. So they fled to the Red Sea, I think, after they had the battle at Kadesh Barnea, when God said you couldn't enter, and the Israelites, they decided to try it on their own. Then the Amorites and the Canaanites come after them and have a big battle, and the Israelites lose. Instead, they fled down, I believe, to the Red Sea. And when you look at a map, that has to be the Gulf of Aqaba.
Yeah, right.
So it's all pointing to that.
Yeah.
This is the Gulf of the Red Sea crossing, and again, there's only one spot on the Gulf that matches, and that's the Nuh'un beach.
Yes, and we get this again because we actually pick right back up in Exodus 14 with what we're talking about, which is Exodus 14:1. Adonai said to Moses, "Tell the people of Israel to turn around and set up camp in front of Pi Hakerit." I'm probably butchering that, forgive me. And I'm also reading in the CJB, it typically leaves the traditional language in here for places. Between Migdal and the sea in front of Baal Zephon, camp opposite of it by the sea. So we get a very clear geographical drawing right here of where this is, which is exactly what you're talking about. And I think you can still see some of this on a map, can't you?
Yeah. So what's interesting is that if you think about, God tells Moses, change your direction, and then Pharaoh will think that you're entangled in the wilderness, that you're lost in the land.
Yeah.
So this is obviously an area that most people don't go down to.
Right.
Like if they're turning off the main freeway, now they're off in the countryside somewhere. And when Pharaoh's the spies, somehow he knew that the Israelites did this, he's like, I can easily catch up to them because they're stuck there. Like they don't, like Moses doesn't know where he's taking them, and that's what Pharaoh would be thinking. And they make that change the direction at Etham. So it's only after they leave Etham, God says, change the direction. Don't go to Midian yet. Don't go to Sinai yet. Don't go to the Red Sea crossing. Then that's when Pharaoh changes his mind. His advisors say, hey, why do we leave? Why do we let the Israelites leave? Let's go after them. And so you can think of a time frame of like how long that took for them to get ready and go and then meet up with the Israelites. There was a number of days involved. It wasn't just instant, like a couple hours later. And so by the time Pharaoh catches up, this, when he changes his mind, it says in the biblical text, it says that the Israelites were marching out. So they were walking, they were on the run when he changes his mind. But then it says in Exodus, I think it's chapter 13 or 14, that when it says, when he met up finally with the Israelites, it says they were encamped at the sea. So they had already set up their tents. I don't, maybe they're realizing, okay, why are we here? We might be here for a couple more days. So they actually set up camp. It says they encamped. So when Pharaoh met up with them, they were encamped at the sea already. They had stopped moving. Then at the sea, so when God is telling Moses where to go, he's very specific, as you just read there.
Yeah.
He's saying, okay, it's between this point and this point, opposite from this other point.
Yeah.
And so if you think about this area being a wilderness area, God had to be very specific. They're following the cloud. The cloud is their guide.
Right.
But it explains to Moses, in Moses' mind, okay, this is where the Israelites, like where I'm taking the Israelites is to this point. And it's a dead end road, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, and it says this right here. You like I said, you nailed it. It's right down in 14. Which, incidentally, after what I read earlier, the very next line is what you said earlier as well, where God was saying. It says right in there that God wanted to make Pharaoh think that they were just wandering aimlessly in the desert, right, to set that up. But when you go further down in 14. It says it right in 14. We'll pick up in 14:8. Adonai made Pharaoh hard-hearted, and he pursued the people of Israel as they left boldly. The Egyptians went after them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh with his cavalry and army, and overtook them as they were encamped by the sea of Pihariot. I'm sorry, that's all I can say to that. And Baal-Zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and saw the Egyptians right there coming after them. In great fear, the people of Israel cried out to Adonai and said to Moses, "What was it because there weren't enough graves in Egypt that you brought us out here to die in the desert? Like you brought us here to dead end?" Right. Thanks a lot, dude. Why have you done this to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we tell you in Egypt to let us alone? We'll just go on being slaves for the Egyptians. It would be better for us to be the Egyptian slaves than to die in the desert. Moses answered the people, "Stop being so fearful. You quit whining."
And if you read that text, the key thing there, they keep saying, in the Israelites' mind, they keep saying to Moses, "You let us out. We're out of Egypt. We're in the wilderness. We're out of Egypt. We're out of Egypt."
Yeah.
If you look at the traditional Red Sea crossing sites, especially the main ones along, like right near the Mediterranean Sea, along this way of Horus, the way of the Philistines, this road, that's not out of Egypt.
No,
then you haven't left Egypt at those crossing sites. You're still in the western side of the ancient Egyptian border, and those crossing sites, they have been going across some marshy lake. From the west to the east, and then now you could say maybe you're outside of Egypt, but the border with ancient Egypt was there. We have all these forts. They had a canal, and so it makes zero sense why the Israelites would not be saying, "Yo, you brought us out of Egypt into the wilderness to die." And Pharaoh would not be thinking if in this area, oh, they're lost in the wilderness, they're entangled in the wilderness. No, the only place you can say that is if you're stuck in some canyon with multiple branches going off, and you're in the area that no one travels, and that's what you find. I've explored Wadi Watir, and it's one of the largest drainage systems in the Sinai Peninsula. And you have all these side canyons coming down into the main Wadi Watir, which means Wadi water, actually, the locals tell me. And so, because you had a lot of flash floods come down there when they have huge storms in the Sinai Peninsula, and this water would wash out into the Nueva, into the Gulf of Aqaba. And this is the route they're in. So when they're in this canyon, there's only one way to the Red Sea crossing, and we have all these side canyons where you can get lost easily. And so when Pharaoh hears about the Israelites being in this canyon system, he's thinking, oh, they're entangled in the land. They're lost in the wilderness.
Yeah. And please, by all means, anybody who's listening to our voices, just go pull up Google Maps and put it on the terrain view where you can see the terrain for both the western portion where we're now talking about where this wadi is, and even the eastern portion that we're going to get to more in detail. We kind of talked about it already, but a little bit more detail here in a second after we get through the crossing. And you could see easily how someone could get lost for about 1 billion years in all these because of what you said. It's just canyon after canyon that just winds and weaves and they connect together. And you could get lost and die out there fast and easy, baby. It is not hard. If you got lost out there, you would be in deep trouble. So yeah, they're sitting here on like this little beach, the only place, and their backs are to the sea, and they think that they're done for. And then we have the story, obviously, of, the parting of the Red Sea, which happens kind of, there's a little bit of time delay, actually. It's kind of crazy because of what happens of the Lord kind of blowing on the sea overnight and splitting everything, and the water recedes and then they cross. But the interesting thing about this particular area, because when you look, both the Gulf of Aqaba and the Gulf of Suez are very deep, like 4,000 feet at the deepest parts, I think, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah, no, it's very deep, especially on the southern, just south of the actual Red Sea crossing path.
Yeah. Now, the Red Sea crossing path, and I think we have geological records to back this up, which I want to kind of get your take on. Where this happened at was a very specifically chosen place that obviously only our God would know ahead of time. And this particular part, I think, was actually only maybe 900 feet deep at its deepest part. Is that correct?
900. It was actually 850 meters.
Okay,
Yeah,
so it's
which is a couple thousand feet deep. So it is deep. But no, Isaiah says he made a path for them through the deep sea. It talks about the deep waters in Exodus chapter 14, 15. The map, when you look at a map, and I don't use the term when I talk about this, some people say, oh, there's a land bridge. That's a term people have used in the past. And then you get geologists and others attacking you saying, oh, there's no land bridge there, and they'll show on a map. When I first started researching this, I remember Ron, even he had this little wrong, because he put it in his newsletter back in the 90s. He thought it was 300 feet deep right there, and he had a little graphic, and he said, well, the data we got was the TOP5 data set from the U.S. Navy.
Yeah,
I think it was. I got that. Anyways, it was a data set you can get from the U.S. Navy back then, and it had like a really distinct, looked like a land bridge across 300 feet deep and thousands of feet deep on either side. Being that I wanted to prove all things and research it, I contacted the scientists who were involved in making that data set, and they said, no, this is not a good data set to look at near continental, near these areas. It's a very narrow gulf. They suggested I talk to Dr. John Hall from the Hebrew University in Israel. He's an Israeli scientist. So I reached out to him. This was this was like 96 or 97. He sent me for free, like this old tube in the mail from Israel. That had all his maps printed out.
Oh, that's cool.
I was surprised.
Yeah.
And I pulled out I still have them, these huge wall maps that have the Gulf of Aqaba and the Mediterranean and all his work that he's doing. But it shows on the Gulf of Aqaba, and even the back of the map, it showed the routes of the survey ships. And this was done in 1978, I believe, the survey ships. And it does show that the Red Sea crossing site is 850 meters, not 300 feet. So that's a couple thousand feet right there.
Yeah.
But it does show that on either side of it, it goes down to about 950 meters or so on the north side. But that south side of the Gulf of Aqaba, and that south end, I should say, of the Nueva's crossing is really deep, like 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 feet right there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next question is it walkable? No matter how deep it is or shallow, are there any obstacles that would stop the Israelites from walking across it or the chariots from chasing after them? And this is the only spot on the Gulf of Aqaba where you have this underwater topography that you can see in this bathymetric map from the Israelis that's been backed up by the 2000 German survey, then by the Saudis who surveyed their half of the Gulf, that eastern side of the Gulf of Aqaba. They surveyed this a couple of years ago, and they released that data, and it all matches that it's this depth. But it shows that there's this gradual gradient that goes from one side to the other, while the rest of the Gulf of Aqaba has underwater sea cliffs.
Yeah.
Like big drop-offs.
Yeah.
Thousands of feet straight down. And I don't remember any text in the Bible that says that the Hebrews put ropes together and rappelled down a cliff.
Yeah.
And then the Pharaoh's chariots did the same, No, they walked on dry land. So if they're walking That means they have to have something that's walkable and you're not scaling a cliff or going down a cliff.
Yeah.
And Nueva is the only spot and that matches that.
And I
So I
think
don't
this,
call it a land bridge, but it's a walkable path for
right.
sure.
And the other thing to take note of, which is important here, again, just to put all the geography into perspective, this particular site, the crossing site, is what, maybe about 9 miles? Is that right? How far from one bank to the other?
Yeah. It's 8 or 9 miles.
wide?
So it's, well, so that's, yeah. So if you look at where the deep end, I've got asked that a couple times. I haven't done the math or looked at the measurements on the map. Because you do have the one deep end really deep on the south, and you have the north deep end. And so you can kind of get an estimate of like what's the maximum width the crossing could have been for how wide the water opened.
Yeah.
So I off the top of my head, I don't know. It could have been a couple miles. Definitely was not a couple hundred feet. So you have a wide area.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have all these people moving forward, and it could have been a wide of, they did it in one night and this isn't the morning watch, which is when the sun just starts coming up. In the Old Testament, there are 3 watches of the night. In the New Testament, they use the Roman watch system, which I think there are 4 or more. Anyways, but there's 3, and the morning watch starts at 3 a.m. and goes to sunrise. And so this is like the break of dawn, and that is when God destroys Pharaoh's armies at the morning watch. So it was before that. Just like made it across this 8 or 9 miles. It depends on how you angle the path. But it's definitely a maximum 8 or 9 miles across.
Yeah, but when you think about that, like, when you walk in my backyard, because our house is kind of built into a very small hill, right? But even the distance from some of my backyard in maybe 50 feet can be 10 foot of elevation difference. And you traverse that and you don't really think much of it, right? Because when you get there in 10 feet, 10 feet and 50 feet, well, you can imagine you extrapolate that out to, 4.5 miles, which would be the middle part, which you would think would be the deepest, right? That's very gradual. It doesn't take long to stack up a couple hundred feet, even 1,000, 2,000 feet. And especially that amount of time, you could do that. And it's just fascinating. It's amazing how all of these things.
Oh, it's like puzzle pieces. Dude, it all fits for this.
Perfect.
Like you can say, well, okay, there are a number of beaches on that western side of the Gulf of Aqaba, and that's why like Bob Cornuke and others, Steve Rudd, I believe, they have the Red Sea crossing at the Straits of Tiran, which is the down south at the beginning of the Gulf of Aqaba. Yeah. So that's a popular alternative site that still has Sinai and Arabia, but you have the Israelites down there going across, and it's actually on the map with the islands there. It looks like, this is a much shorter distance than 8 or 9 miles that Nueva has. But actually, when you look at how they would come across at that angle, it's almost the same distance they crossed. But the key difference is at the Straits of Tiran, you actually have in the middle, you have a place where there are underwater sea cliffs that the Israelites would have to somehow dealt with to get down one side and up the other side. Right in the middle of the Straits of Tiran. Yeah. And to get around that, people have said, well, maybe the Gulf was closed in and that area wasn't there during the Exodus 3,500 years ago. So you have to make up excuses. You have to make up something to get rid of that.
Right. Maybe we just listen to what God's word is and just go with that.
Yeah.
Because the other thing, too, is...
that one spot, it just like logically makes sense.
Yeah,
Here it is. The big beach, walkable path. There's a big beach on the Saudi side.
Yeah.
There's one way onto this beach. It comes off the trade route from Egypt to Midian.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many things that point to what we're talking about. The other thing too, the alternate side. I think when I was digging into this, I think I saw some of that too. And I went down there. I did my due diligence too, and I looked. And the thing that I had problems with too is the same thing. And typically because you're talking about how the Red Sea is now breaking off into these 2 branches and into this particular branch in the Gulf. That's right down there when that mouth opens up to the Gulf, right? And that's typically really deep. When you know anything about underwater oceanography, and topography, that's typically really, 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 really deep there. But yeah, it just didn't make any sense. And everything else that we talked about today just lines up perfect. So now you've traversed, if we kind of catch up back to the story, we've traversed across technically the Red Sea, because they're not going to know it as these different necessarily gulfs. They just called it the Red Sea. And we cross over and we wind up on the eastern side of the map now, but we're literally on the western portion of what we would know today as modern day Saudi Arabia. And then we kind of take off, and it kind of ties back into with what we talked about earlier. And you can see how they're kind of walking around and they're still complaining, right? It's so crazy to me when you read this story, because they literally just had all of these things happen. They watched all of these plagues happen. They watched the firstborn die. They had to smear blood over doorways to keep from getting killed themselves. They have the Egyptians literally bring them plunder, right? Of like, please don't do anything more to us. We're so sorry. They get packed up and sent. They're still complaining. They get run down by Pharaoh. They think they're going to die. They watch the Red Sea get parted. They cross fine. And then God closes everything back in and destroys, Pharaoh and the army. And they're being led by a huge pillar of fire.
Yeah.
And they're still complaining, right? Of like, you just brought us out here to starve to death and die of thirst.
They were hangry.
Maybe they're hangry. I like it, right? And again, you have them where they know they're going on this long journey because they made matzah, right, for multiple days.
That's why they were hangry.
They were hangry. They only had matzah. And so God continues to watch out for them. And I think the next thing we come to in the story, right, is it the manna? Is that where I think we wind up next?
Yeah.
After the Red Sea, there's a couple other spots. In Books of Exodus, it says they went to Mara, where there's bitter water. And we don't really have a good idea. There's different proposed sites on that Saudi Arabian side. Possibly Mara. It could have been a seasonal spring or lake that if a storm came through, filled up, and then you have this dirty water filling in the basin. But after Mara, which was 3 days inland, it said a 3 days journey. After that, they come to Elam, which was which Moses actually wrote down that they had. It must have been a really nice oasis, because he said there was 70 palm trees, 12 wells, and it seemed like a really good spot for them to get water and relax. Then after that, the Book of Exodus has them going into the camping in the wilderness of Sin, and then camping at Rephidim. But Numbers 33, which lists every camping site they went to, has the 10 camping sites to get to Mount Sinai. It says that they went from Elam and camped at the Red Sea again. So that kind of gives you a sense of direction. And they didn't go inland all the way. They're like following the coastline.
Yeah.
Because here now they're at the Red Sea again, obviously on the Saudi side, camping after Elam.
And they're heading
Numbers 33.
South at this point.
Yeah, so it is south. Yeah, if you go north, you're basically at, there are there's an Israeli researcher, and even a friend of mine who believed that they went north from the Red Sea crossing, and they put this camping at the Red Sea at the tip of the Gulf of Aqaba. You're very close to Aqaba, the city of Aqaba, and Eilat in Israel, in that area. But majority of people who have Sinai in Arabia, they have them going south from the Red Sea crossing. You go inland and then you go south.
Yeah.
Because you can't follow the coast right there, because just like the Egyptian side, you have mountains that go right to the water's edge, like Josephus says. So you have to go in through those coastal mountains. And this is where, if you want to look at like the terms of the Exodus, like the names, it says they went to the wilderness of Shur, Shur. And so some people believe that the Shur means wall. That refers to that coastal mountain range that looks like a wall. And so the only way to get through it, you have to go through a canyon. And there are 2 canyons that come off that Saudi Red Sea crossing beach, and it goes inland into the land of Midian. And now you can turn south, and then there's a place where you can actually, this is Magna, we talked about that oasis that says Springs of Moses on it. That's what some people will place, because it's a nice oasis. Remember, they're hitting the water spots. Moses, he's led armies in the past, Egyptian armies, and then he's also led sheep. Now he's leading the Israelites. So he's thinking logistically, okay, the next spot I need to take the Israelites to is where they need food and water to rest. So they're hitting the oases.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And there's only a certain number of them in Northwest Arabia. And Magna is one of them. And it just so happens to have a strong tradition that you have the Springs of Moses. You have the, 300 years ago, I talked about that one guy, that geographer in the Ottoman Empire, he comes through there, the locals show him the rock that Moses struck, nearby this Magna site. So this is a really good site that possibly is either Elam itself or this coastal camping from Numbers 33.
Yeah.
After that, and Numbers 33 says after they left the coastal camping, and they went to the wilderness of Sin, and then from the wilderness of Sin, they went to now the 2 names, I don't know which order they're in. They're either Dofka and Alush, or Alush and Dofka. But these are small sites. We don't know where they're at. But after that, then you hit the split rock of Rephidim. So the split rock of Horeb at Rephidim, and then finally they camp in front of Mount Sinai.
Yeah,
so
which
those
both.
are the.
What
What was that?
Go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say these are the if you look at the route in numbers 33, these are the camping sites listed. Now it'll then take you to the front of Mount Sinai, which if Mount Sinai is Jebel Makla, this peak in the Jebel Allah's range in Arabia, then there's only the eastern side that has the giant plain. It's a higher elevation, so it's cooler temperatures in the summer months, and that's the spot that Ron Wyatt went to 1984 and 85.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where the Bedouin there said, Hina Jebel Musa, here's the mountain of Moses.
Yeah, and the Rock of Horeb, and again, go on Google. It's kind of awesome. It's a great tool. You can see when you pull out in Google, and I know we were talking about this beforehand, and thank you, you educated me that it's kind of like Wikipedia. It sounds like anybody can go on and drop a pen and name it whatever they want, which is a little scary. But I find it interesting that you can still go on and you can zoom Google out, and it still says for this huge, and I don't think we understand the grasp of how huge this mountain range is on the western portion that we're talking about of Saudi Arabia. When you go in there and you look at all the canyons and all the everywhere that you could walk in there, you could see how someone could get lost in there for 40 years easily. Same as you could on the opposite side of the Gulf of Aqaba right there. And I believe that the Rock of Horeb and Jebel al-Lawz, which we would, is actual Mount Sinai, the true Mount Sinai, they're not very far apart. So you could see how they could traverse that distance in a fairly short amount of time. But I also believe that those two sites are south of the Red Sea crossing site that we're talking about. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, if you were to, as a crow flies, there you can say you're going southwest,
Yeah,
kind of down.
South.
But of course, if you actually on the ground walking the canyons, you're going much further south and coming around. And also just to be fair in this discussion, the Dr. Glenn Fritz, he takes a much southern route. So he doesn't have the Rephidim at the Split Rock.
Yeah.
He believes Nuh'un is the crossing, and he has Mount Sinai as Jebel Makla and Jebel Allah's. And he's written his PhD on this. He has a couple of books. You can go to his website at ancientexodus.com. Really nice guy, and he's a geographer. That's what his PhD is in. But he doesn't accept the Caldwell's and the Ron Wyatt Rephidim sites. And so there are, and Steve Rudd too, who has the Strait of Tiran as the Red Sea. He has a southern route to get to Mount Sinai that skips El-Bana and skips Jethro's hometown and the Split Rock. Bob Cornu, even though he has the Red Sea at the Strait of Tiran, he has them going north, and he has them going into the Split Rock, where Jim and Penny Caldwell had found to be Rephidim. Myself, I still lean towards this. It just fits perfectly. It's right off of this north. There's two ways to get to Sinai, like the eastern side. You go way south, or you can go up north. And if you're taking a Red Sea crossing of Nueva, and then even if there's some spots where you might be crossing through the same way you came in. I believe because God is trying to teach them a lesson, and He's the one leading them.
Yeah,
that you're following the cloud. That I see no problem with the northern route, and it's hard to explain in a short discussion without maps and graphics.
Yeah, right.
But the northern route is the one that has this the split rock, the one you see on like YouTube a lot and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's fascinating. So does everybody pretty much agree with where the Rock of, so everybody, it seems like everybody agrees with Rock of Horeb is where it says it is, like on the maps, and then also Jebel al-Lawz, everybody winds up getting there. It's just a matter of where the path is and what the town names are on the way. Is that kind of the gist?
Well, you could say for those who accept Sinai in Arabia, I think the majority will say that it's at Jebel Makla. A couple people try to find another mountain out there, but again, you have to have everything match.
Right.
And I have not seen everything match except at Jebel Makla. Again, so Makla is the peak, the actual peak name that has the black rock on top and the cave on it.
Yeah.
The base has the altar of Moses. But everyone, because the maps back in the 90s and 80s did not have every peak named.
Yeah.
So Ron called it Jebel Allah's, and that's the highest peak, just like 8 or 9 miles north of Makla.
Okay.
It's the Jebel Allah's range on the Saudi maps.
Okay.
So when you say Makla, some people get confused, but it's Jebel Allah's. It's just the peak that's south. Every single peak has a name now.
Just I know. sorry, I know he's got one thing, but just to clarify, because this is important that we talk about this, because you see this in two other places in the Bible too, that and you'll know this better than anyone doing what you're doing, especially at the Drupanar site. We hear Mount Ararat, but I think that's actually the chain. It was known as Ararat, right? Not necessarily that particular peak. It actually in the Book of Jubilees says Mount Lubar specifically was the name of the mountain, I think. But the other thing that we find is Mount Hermon, right? Mount Hermon is the range, but there are actually, I think, 3 big peaks in there. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So it's just like this site. When you're there, in the past, everyone said Jebel Allah is Jebel Allah. When you look on Google, you'll see both terms used, Jebel Allah and Jebel Makla.
Yeah.
I've had people on my YouTube channel leave comments saying, no, you're at the wrong mountain. It's called Jebel Allah. Because I would use the technical term of Makla.
Yeah. Right.
And like, no. This is the same place Ron Wyatt was at and Jeb and Penny Caldwell.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Now, Ben, I know you had, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Is Sin, is that the same place where Abraham was called out of?
Which place?
Sin. You said the desert.
Wilderness of Sin?
The wilderness of Sin.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know. Yeah,
because in one of the translations it said he was called out of the wilderness of Sin, and I was trying to find it, but I couldn't find it. I could be totally wrong. But I
know some people have tried to associate the word Sinai with sin.
Yeah.
And Sinai, they say, well, the original word comes from sin, and that was a moon god. There's a moon god that they worship called the god of sin.
Yeah.
And sin was one of the popular centers for worshiping this moon god was Haran, where Abraham came through. So maybe that's where you get the connection from.
Yeah.
And here's another biblical connection. You have a moon god worship. A popular site to worship this moon god was in Tema, which is an oasis on the outskirts of Midian, just southeast, I think, or east of Tabuk, which is the capital there in that area of Arabia. And there you'll find the Babylonian inscription. This is where Nabonidus, the king of Babylon, ended up at, because he was so enthralled with this moon god Sin.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was camping out there, and that's where you have this connection with Belshazzar, who his son was back in Babylon with Daniel. And so the Persians captured the capital of Babylon. Nabonidus was stuck in Arabia. He was there just enjoying himself at the worshiping this god Sin, this moon god.
Because reading, not to get off, but just reading in chapter 12 of Genesis, and he just goes from Egypt from there. So it seemed pretty close. So why not?
Geographically.
Yeah.
I mean, in the grand scheme, I guess.
Yeah. That's just a question.
It's funny too, because we never even think, like when Moses, I think we have such a Western view of things, because we think a large distance is 30 miles, 50 miles, 100 miles, even 500
they
miles.
They walk 30 in a day.
Yeah, right. And especially through the terrain too, because in my mindset, looking back at what I was taught and the picture that I had in church.
Oh yeah,
that Moses just kind of fled to this place that kind of geographically you don't really know in your mind, but it couldn't have been too far away. Yeah. Which in reality, it's so cool talking to you today, because that's something that I had never really put together either. Still connecting the dots and wiping away what I had known and replacing it with what is actually right. Where he is rewalking all of this path that he's reverse engineering the path that he fled on.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating, because I've never thought of that before. And it makes so much sense, because isn't that how God works?
And didn't God say, wherever your feet touch, I will give you? So was his descendants retracing that step as well?
No, that's interesting thought. Yeah, it's very cool. It's a good. This has been a really good talk. Even definitely for me, I get so much out of these shows. I don't want anybody to think that hopefully you guys get a lot out of it too, but we get a lot out of it too. It helps us grow tremendously as well. But we get to this mountain. What are some good geographical signs that this is the proper Mount Sinai? I know we've kind of already alluded to, the top of the mountain is still cooked today. But something inside of that I want to dive into, just kind of get that discussion going about that question that I picked up early and I wrote a note down. You said that the top of the mountain is made of basalt. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a volcanic rock. It's basalt, and the bottom is on granite. But let me be clear. So I've been up on the top 8 or 9 times now. But I've been on different portions of the mountain up to 25 times, like whether it's in a cave or the plateau that people say the 70 elders ate with God at. But when you're at the top, most people assume it's just the salt rock, the black rock. But you also have veins of granite, the tan rock that you see at the base. It cuts through different areas of that black rock at the top. There's a little flat spot on that southern ridge. I have a little video of it up there. And when you're standing there on that ridge of the mountain, it's a great view. We always, on our tours, we take people to the top, those who can climb it. But there's this one spot where you'll see not just black rock, but there are tan rock there. It's granite. And then you also have the marble, the white marble. And when you're at the base of the mountain, at what they call the altar of Moses, that L-shaped stone, like the corrals, and you look up the ravine where the water came down, Deuteronomy says there was a stream. At the very top of the ravine, you will actually see a white vein. When you go there, you make it up there, there is a marble quarry, an ancient marble quarry, and that's where they got the marble, the white marble pieces that you see at the base or scattered around the altar of Moses, these pillar sections, these columns. And that came from at the top of the mountain. So if you're looking at your question about the geography, like what are the key landmarks, or why would we know this is the mountain? Well, so when you're there, this is the only place where you have a huge plain that goes right to the base of the mountain. Even if you look at other mountains, you have to end up going through a narrow wadi, and this is like Jebel Law's, the Law's Peak. You have to walk almost a day's journey in just to get to the base of that mountain. But Jebel Makla, which is this peak, individual peak that's about 8 miles south, I think, or 6 or 7 miles south. You have the plain where the Israelites camp going right to the base, easy access. And it makes sense because the Bible says that the Israelites left their tents, they walked to the base. It can't be that far of a journey, because when God speaks the 10 Commandments and they flee, they said, they get so scared theyring God's voice. It says they fled back to their tents. And they tell Moses, you speak to us. We don't want to have God speak to us. We'll be killed. So they're at their tents. So this encampment has to be nearby. It can't just be 2 or 3 days journey away.
Yeah.
And that's what you find that Makla has on the south and east side, these large open areas where the Israelites could camp at. And then when you're at it, you also find this ravine coming out that during springtime, the storms coming through, or if it's a wetter season, you have springs coming out of the ground there. When we walked up that ravine, we saw pools of water. There are fig trees growing, almond trees. Aaron's staff was made from almond, and it was an almond rod or a branch. And so you have almond trees growing in this ravine. And so that's another key indicator. You have to have a stream where the water came out of that Moses wrote about. The mountain has to have a cave, another geological structure on the mountain that points to this being Sinai. And there's only one large cave on it. Now, there are many rock overhangs around, but there's this large cave. You can see it from the base, looking straight up, and you see this one big cave up there. And so these are some of the key factors. And then it has to be on the backside of the wilderness. And so here is where you can get, there's different ways to approach that term. Do you remember it said in Exodus, I think chapter 3, where Moses takes the flock, the sheep of Jethro and the flocks out there. It says he journeyed to the backside of the wilderness and came across, saw the burning bush. And this was Horeb, the mountain of God. If you look at a map, the Jebel Allah's range, that coastal mountain range, if Moses is with Jethro in El Bada, the modern Saudi town of El Bada, which is probably Jethro's hometown. It's a big oasis. It has a lot of ruins there, Midianite pottery. You can call it that. But from there's a wadi that is actually today called Wadi Musa, the Wadi of Moses. This valley, there's only one valley. It goes from that town to the base of Jebel Makla, the west side. And this is very possible the path that Moses, journeyed with the sheep, walked with the sheep. And then it says he came to the mountain of God and it was on the backside of the wilderness. So if you look at that term, it could either be like, okay, he went through the wilderness, now he's on the backside. So from El Bada, Jethro's home, he takes the sheep and he comes across this big mountain range, Jebel Makla. It could also be Moses knew about this huge desert on the other side. And that's called the Hizma Desert. This is like, if you know the story of Lawrence of Arabia, if you've been to Jordan, seen Wadi Rum, it's like Southwest or like Utah and Monument Valley. You have these huge sandstone, red mesas, red sand dunes. It's a really beautiful area, but it's a giant desert. It's called the Hisma Desert, and that is just east of Sinai. So on the west or backside of that desert is this Jabal Allah's range, where Jabal Makla Peak is, and the big plain where the Israelites encamped. And so either way, how you read that verse in Exodus chapter 3, Jabal Makla matches. And it's on the backside of one of the deserts.
Yeah.
It's right there. And so with the plain, the creek bed, the easy access to the mountain, Moses could climb it up and down a couple times a day when he first got there. And be on the backside, to me, is the only spot. And then, of course, you have the local tradition. And then you have the archaeology. So, and the archaeology can be, people will dispute it. Like they'll say the cow petroglyphs you see at the Golden Calf altar site, they'll say it's Neolithic, Stone Age. And then like the marble at the base, the altar Moses site that we're calling, people will say it's the Saudis. They'll say it's Nabatean from the time of Christ. But if you look at geography, which you can't dispute, you have a large plain there. You have this one peak. You have the stream bed there. You have one cave, and then you do have that local tradition. Like, where do they come up with that idea that this is the mountain of God? Well, how did the Bedouins know that unless they passed it down through all the different generations? So in my mind, this is it. Like, there's no other place in that area matches.
Yeah, just everything about it. When you look at the biblical record and you look at the geography and you look at the history, like you said, of the Bedouins of the area, knowing all this, I'm sorry, but it fits like Cinderella's slipper to me.
Yeah.
I think we can call the ball, right? So yeah, man, this is fascinating. So just one last thing I want to kind of dive into with a little bit of time I have left is the altar that you referenced a second ago, because I had a note written down to talk about that too, where what indicators do we have? What is the altar? Because I think maybe we have two different things. This is where I'm not so good. I want to check myself here. We have the altar that I think Moses constructed after he came back down from the mountain to basically make amends for what the idiots had done while he was on the mountain. I believe I could have that wrong. And then you have the golden calf ceremony and what they did while he was up there. All of 40 days it took him to freak out and decide to melt down all the gold and make a golden calf. These two geographical things that we have, what do we have specifically that point to these being possibly there?
Okay, yeah. So definitely there are two altars in the Exodus account. So if you look at the story of, if I'm trying to remember now how this goes, I believe Moses did construct the altar of, we call the altar of Moses. He did that one first at the base. And then he goes up later in that, because later in that same chapter, that's Exodus chapter 24 or 34, one of those. He builds the altar and sets up the 12 pillars.
Yeah.
Later on, that like two or three verses later, he's bringing up that same day, basically the 70 elders, and it says Joshua, Aaron, they all go up and they eat with God. And then Joshua and Moses stay on the mountain. Aaron and everyone else ends up going back down. And then Moses is up there for 40 days. And so the altar's already built that Moses built at the base.
I had it backwards.
Moses is now up on the mountain peak with God for 40 days. The Israelites get antsy and then they decide that they're going to make their own gods. And so that's when they construct their altar, the altar of the golden calf. Now, if you look at why would we call it this? And so here's the most fascinating thing that most people don't know about is that what we call the altar of the golden calf, it's this big, it's a natural pile of stones. Maybe they added some more stones to it. And so maybe the altar was constructed on top of the pile that was already there. Yeah. It's like a natural platform. And there's some other ideas of where like at the base itself, there could be another place. Like one guy, a friend of mine, is actually saying this is the true altar of the golden calf. But again, you have this rock pile and you have cow petroglyphs carved on it. Now, when Ron was there, how was that discovered? Well, it's really interesting. He brought this friend of his new acquaintance, David Fasold, who was interested in looking for Noah's Ark. And he happens to show up on the trip, and this was March of 1985. He's on the trip that the Saudi prince, or this local businessman from Tabuk, who heard about Ron's ordeal the year before when he was in prison in Saudi for 70-some days. He was in jail there for illegally coming into the country. And so David Fasold, who's a treasure hunter, has this equipment that can look for gold. And he's using it out there on Noah's Ark. And the Saudi guy sees that and he's like, oh, maybe we can use this in Arabia at these sites. So he gets Ron and David Fazel legal business visas to enter. That was the only way back in '85 you become the Saudi as a businessman, or if you had family living there, or going to Hajj if you're a Muslim. And so they get this business visa. They all go over there. And while they're at the base of Mount Sinai, they do a test with Fazel and this treasure hunting equipment. It looks like dowsing rods. But so critics will attack Ron because Fazel was using this. But I was talking to Fazel about this. It was interesting. The Saudis, they hid, it was either 10 or 11 or 12 gold rings all through that area. And then they asked Fazel, they wanted to test him. They said, can you find what we just hid? And he found every single one, except for one they had put up in a tree, an acacia tree. Yeah. And he said, no, they have to be buried in the ground for this equipment to work. They were impressed. Well, Fazel's equipment uncovered these double stone wall, 18-foot diameter stone circles at the base of the mountain, right near where the modern guard shack that was never used for guards, but they had put it there, and they put that fence, blocking the access to the mountain because of Ron showing it to them. But anyway, so Fazel's equipment found that. Then he mentioned that, and so this is at the base. The altar, the golden calf site, is across the valley. I don't know if it's a mile away or something, but he said his equipment was pointing to a large gold cache, a gold deposit in the distance. So he was following, his dowsing rods across the valley. And as they're getting close to the stone pile, no one knows what's there. The locals do. And they knew that they had cow petroglyphs there. The locals stopped following them. They said, no, we're not going near that site. That's cursed. And this is the locals will not go with him to the actual site. Fazel keeps following the signal to this stone pile, and that's when they discovered the stones were all covered in cow petroglyphs. And so that's how that site was discovered because of that. Yeah. So even back then, the locals had like a negative opinion or connotation of that rock pile. Right. And it's covered in stone petroglyphs. And even the Saudis, their official book about the archaeology of the area, it's called Al-Bid, where they try to disprove that it's Mount Sinai, and they say everything's Nabatean or Neolithic, which is Stone Age. Nothing's in the Old Testament, they try to say. Well, in that book, they say that these cow petroglyphs date up to 1500 BC. Like that's you can say the latest. So from way before up to 1500 BC. In the scheme of things, if you look at the traditional dating of the Exodus, the 1446 BC or so, it's like a 50-year difference, which is very close. And when you're looking at everything, you can say it's the same time period. So even their own book, you can use and say, well, these cow petroglyphs date up to the late Bronze Age, the time of the Exodus. So you can't just say, they're Stone Age people carving these things. Right. So that's the altar of Moses. So it's a pile of rocks with these cow petroglyphs that date up to the late Bronze Age. Now you look at what we call the altar of Moses, and again, I think it's Exodus chapter 24, where Moses is there, and it says that he rose up early in the morning. And it says he built an altar and then he set up 12 stone pillars. And so what's interesting, when the Saudis excavated this, and again, this is in their book, Al-Bid, that was published in 2003. And they excavated the site, I believe, in 1996 or 95. They had found that it's an L-shaped stone structure or a boomerang. And then on one end, there's some more like square, like rooms or square stone structures. On that, you can say that north end of the stone structure, they found layers of ash. Now, sadly, the report is not very detailed. Like we don't know like what type of ash, or it just says it was something was burnt there. Yeah, and so it could be another piece of evidence that shows that this was used as an altar. And people who build corrals. A lady that was interviewed by Tim Mahoney for his Patterns of Evidence book. And she, knows how to deal with, ranches and, building these corrals for animals to go into. She said this is a perfect example of a corral for animals because you have that L shape, that open end on the very end. So that lead cow or sheep that goes in, if there's a no way out in their mind, they won't go in. They'll think, this is closed structure. So the animals won't follow in. But if you have that corner where it opens up and keeps going around the corner, they'll think in their head, this will keep going in, there's a way out. And so that lead animal would go in, and then all the other animals will follow. And that's what you find here. Now, when we were there in 2016, and this is another story for another time, but we had a miracle occur. We met a local Saudi, and he and his friends showed us all these sites. They didn't know that we were there for 10 days already. But because I found 2 baby goats at the base of Mount Sinai that were abandoned by their mother. Anyways, we met these local Saudis because of these abandoned goats. And then they said, hey, do you know that this is at the gas station at the base of Sinai? And it turns out this guy who's talking to us, he's the son of Ibrahim, who's the man who told Ron Wyatt, Hena Jabal Musa. This is the mountain of Moses. And he's the guy who knew the Caldwells.
Yeah.
So his father's name Ibrahim. It's the same guy. He's like the sheik of that area.
Yeah.
His son is now showing us the mountain. What a connection,
Wow.
And so we play it dumb. We're like, oh wow, this is this is Moses' mountain. we were just there this morning, sneaking around taking photos.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But anyways, him and his friends, they take us from the gas station. We walk through. We go past the guard shack, past the fence there. This is April 2016, so this is before the tourist visas, and you're not supposed to be there if you're a Westerner.
Yeah.
But they take us right to the base. And I have it on video. I have it on my YouTube channel. I was recording that whole day when I found the baby goats. So when we met these guys, and then when they take us to the base of Mount Sinai. And we're at the base, and his name is Joseph, which is Joseph. And he actually shows us, he reenacts like the sheep and where the cows would have gone. He said, well, this is where they walked up in his broken English. And he shows it. And he said that this is where they were sacrificed by Moses. And that's the end where the Saudi archaeologists had found the layers of ash.
Yeah.
And here's this guy, the Saudi, who's his father knew about that this was the real Mount Sinai. And he's explaining to us, thousands of years after the event, what happened there. And it was just so amazing, how we met him. And in fact, later on, because we met him, we were able to fly the drone around there because he let us do it.
Nice.
And became a good friend of ours. But again, the locals know the story. They knew like what the structure is for.
Yeah. The connection to Ron's, only God, right? Only God, man.
Yeah.
Only God. So I guess one last thing that I've come back to twice now, and I guess it didn't dawn on me until just a moment ago when I thought about it. But the top of this mountain is made of volcanic basalt. Is there a volcano anywhere around that area?
No. Now, okay, so this I don't know how much time we have, but let me explain a couple things. So
You're fine. No limit. Go ahead.
No limit. Okay. This is the 3-hour show we're talking about.
Okay, maybe a little bit of a limit.
Okay.
Part 1, part 2.
I'm not a geologist. I have a lot of geologist friends. I love reading up on this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's not, there's no volcano. It's not a volcano, this mountain.
Yeah.
But there's a term that's called a roof pendant. I think you can look up on Wikipedia or Google, whatever, for your geology textbook. And basically what happens, you can say maybe it happened after the flood or during the flood from a biblical standpoint, but this area was at one time covered by water, so we believe it was a flood. And so there were eruptions, like the whole Northwest Arabia does have volcanoes, but Jebel Makla itself is not a volcano. But you do have magma coming up and covering a region, whether it's like, just coming out of the ground and underwater there and covering things. But over time, so you can say maybe during the days of Peleg, during when the continent split up, or if that's what that means, whenever the mountains were formed, you have this push up of granite, and basically, in my simple way of understanding this, you already had lava laid down, then you have granite coming up, so now you have this 2 distinct colored rocks. So you have the basalt on top, which does cover a couple peaks, not just the one peak. And then it goes to the west. If you look on Google Earth, you'll see this. The black rock goes all the way down the valley floor to other mountains to the west towards Al-Bada. And so the bottom is this granite rock, and then you have a distinct line because you had this other rock that was already laid down, and then you have these veins, or they call them dikes, of marble that goes through. And you also have, again, I mentioned you have tan granite rock at the summit. And so when people ask, well, did God's fire burn the mountain? I don't understand in my mind, how did God interact physically with the rocks there?
Yeah.
Because there are other types of rocks there that are not black or say burnt.
Yeah.
Now it is interesting. You do find the basalt, which is the majority type of rock at the top. When you break it open, you'll see videos about this. People say, look, it's light inside and the dark on the outside. And there's a term for that called desert varnish or oxidation. You have the rocks that's exposed to the elements. And so the outside gets oxidized, like rusted. depending on what type of minerals in the rock, and it'll change color. And in these rocks, it goes from dark to light. It's still basalt, though. It's not It's not tan granite in the middle, like some people claim, and then black basalt on the outside. No, it's all basalt, but just from dark to light, the color. The question is, did God's presence like speed up the varnish process, the oxidation? And that's where a scientist, a friend of mine who's a Christian, a believer, and he was the lab lead, or he ran the lab for either North or South Dakota, for one of the mining institutes there. But his PhD was in material science, and he was saying, "Oh, look, we need to do a test where you check all the basalt in the area and outside of the area, and then you look at the oxidation rate. Mm-hmm. Is the rate on this mountains like way different from the oxidation rate from a nearby peak or 10 miles away, and compare with other basalt?" That would be the test to check, and no one's done that yet. And then it would be very time-consuming and expensive, but I think it needs to be done. It'd be awesome if we could say, "Hey, this rock is actually, changed, or you can call it burnt, or oxidized by God's presence."
Yeah,
we can't really say that right now. If you haven't been there, you see the videos, and I'm not. I don't do the tabloid headlines with like, look, this is like I can smell it. And like one guy saw on YouTube saying, "It smells burnt." And it was the rock I gave this guy. And I was just thinking, no, it doesn't. I was want to give you that sample. And he's on YouTube saying, "This is a burnt rock. I smell. You can even smell the fire still." And it's not that way.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we know that this, to me, it's Mount Sinai. So those rocks are special up there because they were, and at the top, God's presence was there.
Yeah.
It's a cool souvenir. Mm-hmm. And so everyone who climbs the mountain has to get a little piece of rock from there, and that's awesome. And I believe the story that the event really did happen, and this is where it happened at. The little details of like how did the divine fire of God physically change the rock, that I don't know. And so maybe something we can prove. We can have a lab test for divine fire.
Yep. Yeah, man, it's I got to tell you, everything, when you look at it and you look at again, I just keep coming back to the same thing. All signs, like you have to have so many things that point to the same thing to make it all make sense. And every single step of the way from the Exodus point out of Egypt to this location just absolutely fits the Bible and history and everything like Cinderella's slipper. So, Andrew, you're awesome, brother. Thanks for walking us through this, man. And I look forward to many, many more conversations if you're game on all kinds of other biblical sites, brother, because they are fascinating. Yeah. Fascinating. So
just send me a message and I'll be ready.
Thanks, brother. Well, hey, man, we appreciate it. I know, obviously, for Andrew, it's getting dark. It's getting pretty late over there. He's working 7 hours ahead. So thanks for being flexible on that too, brother, and taking the time to talk with us tonight. So we really appreciate it, man. You're awesome.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to share all these things, and I love taking people out here and showing them the sites. If they can't make it out here, then we have a YouTube channel where you can watch this. Of course, many other people have been out there too, made their own videos. There's a lot of information on the internet, but if someone wants to contact us or ask me questions, they can do it through our website. And so,
and please provide that for our listeners, please.
Yeah, so it's, for the Mount Sinai research, it's discoveredsinai.com. So discovered, past tense, discoveredsinai.com. And there's a contact page there. They'll go right to my email and right to my phone. So I'll see it.
And your YouTube?
Discovered Media. Just look on YouTube, Discovered Media, and it'll pull up our channel. And we have videos on all these sites, mainly drone videos. We were the first to get drone at the top of the mountain, sneak a drone into Saudi, and do all this stuff. And now, you see other people doing it now, but, we're out there from 2016 all the way up to now doing drone work out there. Plus also our research in Turkey at the Noah's Ark site.
Fantastic. Well, brother, again, you're awesome. Appreciate you.
Thank you, guys.
All right. With that, we will bid you adieu until next time on The Foil. Take care. Bye.
Atomic.